In a city known for its vibrant mix of cultures and people, Detective Karen Hargrove was a name that sparked strong reactions. Some called her tough, while others whispered behind closed doors about her problematic behavior. Karen had been on the force for over 15 years, earning commendations for solving cases, but leaving a trail of controversy in her wake. She often targeted individuals based on stereotypes, particularly those from minority communities. Her colleagues avoided discussing her actions openly, fearing backlash or being labeled as troublemakers. But to many residents, Karen was more than just a strict officer. She was someone who used her authority in ways that felt unfair and discriminatory. On the other side of town, Special Agent Maya Johnson was preparing for one of the most critical missions of her career. A decorated member of the FBI, Maya had spent years climbing the ranks through sheer determination and skill. Known for her sharp instincts and calm demeanor, she had earned respect not only within her agency, but also among law enforcement agencies nationwide. This time, however, Maya wasn't wearing her usual formal attire. Dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie, she blended seamlessly into the crowd, determined to stay low-key. Her mission: to gather intelligence on a dangerous human trafficking network operating in the heart of the city. Late one evening, Maya parked her car near a small diner tucked away in a quiet corner of the bustling downtown area. The neon sign flickered above the entrance, casting a soft glow over the parking lot. Inside, she sipped coffee while reviewing stacks of documents spread across the table. Every detail mattered, and Maya couldn't afford distractions. Yet little did she know, fate had other plans. Detective Karen Hargrove was patrolling nearby when something caught her eye: a dark sedan parked outside the diner. Something about the car seemed out of place to her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. Deciding to play it safe, Karen pulled up behind the vehicle and ran the license plate through the system. The results came back clean. There were no outstanding warrants or suspicious flags associated with the car. Still, Karen's gut told her to dig deeper. She stepped out of her patrol car, flashlight in hand, and approached the sedan with purpose. As she peered inside, her eyes landed on Maya sitting calmly in the driver's seat. For a moment, Karen hesitated, taking in the sight of this woman, someone who didn't fit the image Karen expected to see behind the wheel of such a modest car. Her mind raced with assumptions, fueled by biases she refused to acknowledge. Without missing a beat, Karen tapped on the window, signaling for Maya to roll it down. When Maya complied, Karen wasted no time. "License and registration," she barked, her tone sharp and commanding. There was no warmth in her voice, no attempt at civility. Maya, sensing the tension but choosing to remain composed, handed over her documents without argument. She knew better than to escalate the situation unnecessarily, especially given the nature of her current assignment. Karen examined the license closely, her expression hardening. Something about the photo didn't sit right with her. Whether it was Maya's confident gaze or simply the color of her skin, Karen decided almost instantly that something was amiss. What started as a routine traffic stop was quickly spiraling into something far more complicated, and neither woman realized how life-changing this encounter would become. Karen stood beside Maya's car, her flashlight shining directly into the vehicle as she scrutinized the license with an intensity that felt excessive. The beam of light cut through the dimness of the parking lot, momentarily blinding Maya, who squinted against its glare. Despite the discomfort, Maya remained calm, her hands resting gently on the steering wheel. She had been in far more intense situations during her time with the FBI, but something about this moment felt different, charged with an unspoken tension. "This doesn't look like you," Karen declared abruptly, her voice carrying a mix of accusation and suspicion. She held up the license for emphasis, though it was clear she wasn't seeking clarification. It was a statement, not a question. Her tone suggested she had already made up her mind about Maya before even speaking to her further. Maya tilted her head slightly, her expression neutral but curious. "It's my license," she replied evenly, keeping her voice steady and polite. "Everything is current and valid." But Karen wasn't satisfied. Instead of acknowledging Maya's response, she leaned closer, narrowing her eyes as if searching for some hidden clue that would justify her growing distrust. "Step out of the car," Karen demanded sharply, her hand instinctively moving toward the holster at her side. For a split second, Maya considered pushing back, not aggressively, but firmly enough to remind Karen of basic courtesy. However, she quickly dismissed the thought. Arguing with someone so entrenched in their assumptions wouldn't help matters. Besides, revealing her identity too soon might compromise her undercover operation. With deliberate care, Maya unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out of the car, ensuring her movements were slow and non-threatening. The cool night air brushed against her face as she stood under the flickering neon lights of the diner. Passers-by glanced curiously at the scene unfolding before them, some pausing to watch while others continued on their way. A couple sitting inside the diner turned their heads toward the window, intrigued by the commotion. Unbeknownst to Karen, several people began filming the interaction on their phones, capturing every word and gesture. Karen circled around Maya, her demeanor increasingly hostile. "What's your business here?" she asked, her words clipped and accusatory. "You don't live in this neighborhood, do you?" Maya raised an eyebrow, surprised by how quickly the situation had escalated. "I'm just grabbing dinner," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the diner. "Is there a problem, officer?" Karen ignored the question, instead focusing on what she perceived as inconsistencies. "You're dressed pretty casually for someone who claims they're doing nothing wrong," she remarked, eyeing Maya's hoodie and jeans. "And this car doesn't seem like something someone like you would drive." "Someone like me?" Maya repeated softly, her tone measured but laced with quiet incredulity. She didn't need to say more. The implication behind Karen's words was obvious, yet Maya resisted the urge to call her out directly. Instead, she decided to test the waters one last time. Slowly, she reached into her jacket pocket, where her FBI badge was safely tucked away. Before she could even pull it out, however, Karen barked, "Hands where I can see them." Her voice echoed through the parking lot, drawing even more attention from bystanders. Maya froze mid-motion, her fingers hovering near the edge of her pocket. For a brief moment, the world seemed to stand still. "I'm reaching for my ID," Maya explained calmly, locking eyes with Karen. "I'm a federal agent." But Karen either didn't hear her or chose not to believe her. In one swift motion, she grabbed Maya's wrist, twisting it slightly as she forced her arms behind her back. The cold metal of handcuffs clicked into place, binding Maya's hands together. Shock rippled through Maya's body, not because of the physical restraint, but because of the sheer absurdity of the situation. Here she was, a highly trained FBI agent, being treated like a criminal over a routine traffic stop gone horribly wrong. As Karen shoved Maya toward the patrol car, muttering under her breath about people thinking they can fool the system, Maya couldn't help but notice the growing crowd. Phones were now pointed in their direction, recording every detail. Though frustrated, Maya reminded herself to stay composed. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about exposing the kind of behavior that had no place in law enforcement. And deep down, she knew this incident would have consequences far beyond the confines of this parking lot. The neon lights of the diner cast an eerie glow over the parking lot as Karen pushed Maya toward the back seat of her patrol car. The handcuffs dug uncomfortably into Maya's wrists, but she refused to let her frustration show. Instead, she kept her gaze steady, scanning the scene around her. Bystanders had gathered in small clusters, some whispering to each other, while others continued filming the encounter. Their phones illuminated the night like tiny spotlights, capturing every word and movement. Karen opened the rear door of the squad car with unnecessary force, shoving Maya inside before slamming it shut. The sound echoed through the quiet street, drawing even more attention. Maya sat upright, her posture calm despite the circumstances. She knew better than to react impulsively. Years of training had taught her that patience was key in moments like this. Still, the absurdity of the situation gnawed at her. Here she was, a decorated federal agent, being treated like a common criminal because of someone's baseless assumptions. Back at the front of the car, Karen leaned against the hood, speaking into her radio. Her voice carried a mix of irritation and triumph, as if she'd just uncovered some major crime instead of wrongfully detaining an innocent person. "Dispatch, I've got a suspicious individual in custody," she reported, claiming to be some kind of agent, but I'm not buying it. Inside the car, Maya exhaled slowly, steeling herself for what came next. She could hear murmurs from the crowd outside. A few people shouted questions at Karen, demanding to know why she had arrested Maya. Others simply stood silently, their expressions a blend of disbelief and anger. Maya couldn't make out every word, but the tone was clear. This wasn't sitting well with anyone. Moments later, another officer arrived on the scene, a younger man named Greg Miller, who often worked alongside Karen. He stepped out of his patrol car cautiously, his eyes darting between Maya seated in the backseat and Karen standing near the hood. Something about the situation felt off to him, though he didn't say anything right away. Instead, he approached Karen, keeping his voice low so only she could hear. "What's going on here?" Greg asked, glancing briefly at Maya. His tone was neutral, but there was a hint of unease beneath his words. "This one's trouble," Karen replied dismissively, jerking her thumb toward the squad car. "Claims to be FBI, but look at her. Does she look like any federal agent you've ever seen?" Greg frowned slightly, unsure how to respond. He walked over to the window of the patrol car, peering inside at Maya. "Ma'am," he said politely, "can you confirm your identity?" Maya met his gaze evenly. "I'm Special Agent Maya Johnson with the FBI," she stated clearly, her voice firm but composed. "You can verify my credentials if you'd like." Greg hesitated, then turned back to Karen. "Did you check her ID?" he asked. Karen waved him off, rolling her eyes. "She tried to pull something out of her pocket earlier. I stopped her before she could fake anything." Realization dawned on Greg's face. He exchanged a glance with Karen, silently urging her to reconsider her approach. Reluctantly, Karen retrieved Maya's wallet from the front seat of her sit-in and handed it to Greg. As he flipped it open, his expression shifted instantly. Inside was an official FBI badge, unmistakable in its design and authority. Greg froze, staring at the badge for several seconds before turning back to Karen. "This is legit," he muttered under his breath, his voice tinged with disbelief. "She really is FBI." Karen's face flushed red, though whether from embarrassment or defiance was hard to tell. "That doesn't mean she's not hiding something," she snapped defensively. But even as she spoke, cracks began to form in her confident facade. By now, the crowd outside had grown restless. Someone shouted, "What's going on? Why did you arrest her?" Others chimed in, their voices rising in unison. Phones continued recording, capturing Karen's increasingly flustered demeanor. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, though she refused to admit fault. Inside the car, Maya remained silent, watching everything unfold with a mixture of frustration and resolve. She knew this moment would define more than just her own dignity. It would shine a light on the biases and flaws within the system itself. And as the cameras rolled and voices rose, one thing became clear. This incident wasn't ending anytime soon. As the crowd outside the patrol car grew louder, Greg Miller stepped back from Karen, his face pale and uncertain. He glanced at Maya through the window again, then at Karen, clearly struggling to process what had just happened. The gravity of the situation was sinking in, and it was evident that this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. It was a glaring misuse of authority. Karen, however, wasn't ready to concede. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, her jaw clenched as she tried to regain control of the narrative. "Even if she is FBI," Karen said sharply, loud enough for bystanders to hear, "that doesn't explain why she was acting so suspicious. You don't just sit in a random parking lot late at night unless you're up to something." Her words hung in the air, feeble attempts to justify her actions. but they only fueled the growing tension. A man in the crowd shouted, "Suspicious. She's sitting in a diner parking lot eating dinner. What's suspicious about that?" Others nodded in agreement, their voices rising like a wave crashing against Karen's fragile defense. Greg finally intervened, his tone firmer this time. "We need to handle this properly," he said, addressing Karen directly. "You can't keep her detained without cause. This is serious." Reluctantly, Karen unlocked the squad car door and opened it. Maya emerged slowly, her hands still cuffed behind her back. Her expression remained calm, but there was a quiet intensity in her eyes, a look that spoke volumes without saying a word. She didn't need to yell or demand justice. Her presence alone was enough to command respect. "Take these off," Greg instructed, gesturing toward the handcuffs. Karen hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly as she fumbled with the keys. When the cuffs finally clicked open, Maya brought her hands forward, rubbing her wrists gently. She didn't say anything immediately, choosing instead to let the weight of the moment settle over everyone present, including Karen. Word of the incident spread quickly. Within hours, videos captured by bystanders made their way online, sparking outrage across social media platforms. Clips of Karen's aggressive behavior juxtaposed with Maya's composed demeanor painted a stark picture of prejudice and abuse of power. Hashtags like #JusticeForMaya began trending nationwide, drawing attention not only to this specific case, but also to broader issues of racial profiling within law enforcement. Local news outlets picked up the story, amplifying calls for accountability. Reporters reached out to Maya for comment, but she declined to speak publicly, at least for now. Instead, she focused on documenting every detail of the encounter, knowing how critical it would be for any investigation that followed. Meanwhile, Karen faced mounting pressure from all sides. Her superiors demanded answers, while colleagues who had long turned a blind eye to her behavior suddenly found themselves questioning their own silence. Internal Affairs launched an immediate inquiry into the incident, reviewing bodycam footage and witness statements. As details emerged, it became clear that Karen's actions were not an isolated mistake. They were part of a pattern. Past complaints against her resurfaced, revealing a history of targeting individuals based on race or ethnicity. Each new revelation added fuel to the fire, turning public opinion decisively against her. For Maya, the aftermath was surreal. Friends and colleagues expressed support, praising her composure during such a humiliating ordeal. Yet, despite the outpouring of encouragement, she couldn't shake the frustration bubbling beneath the surface. It wasn't just about her personal experience. She knew countless others had endured similar treatment without the privilege of a badge to protect them. As days passed, Karen's attempts to downplay the incident fell flat. In interviews with Internal Affairs, she claimed Maya must have misled her somehow, insisting she'd acted on instinct rather than bias. But video evidence told a different story, one of blatant discrimination and unchecked prejudice. With each passing day, Karen's excuses sounded weaker, her defenses crumbling under the weight of undeniable proof. And yet Maya refused to let anger consume her. Instead, she channeled her energy into planning her next move. This wasn't just about holding Karen accountable. It was about exposing systemic flaws and pushing for meaningful change. As the city watched and waited, one thing was certain. Maya Johnson wasn't going to let this moment slip away quietly. The days following the incident felt like a whirlwind for Maya. The story of her wrongful arrest had exploded across social media, sparking conversations far beyond the city where it happened. News anchors discussed it during primetime broadcasts, activists shared their thoughts on podcasts, and community leaders organized rallies to demand justice. For many, Maya's experience was a stark reminder of the systemic issues plaguing law enforcement, a deeply personal example of how bias could escalate into outright discrimination. Despite the overwhelming attention, Maya chose to remain measured in her response. She knew that reacting impulsively or seeking revenge would only overshadow the larger message she wanted to send. Instead, she spent hours reflecting on what had happened, thinking not just about herself, but about others who might face similar treatment without the same resources or platform to fight back. This wasn't just her battle, it was everyone's. When internal affairs officials contacted her for a formal statement, Maya didn't mince words. She recounted every detail of the encounter with precision, emphasizing how Karen's actions were rooted in prejudice rather than legitimate suspicion. But Maya went further. Rather than simply filing a complaint against Karen, she proposed something bolder: the creation of a task force aimed at addressing systemic racism within law enforcement. Her idea caught people off guard, not because it was radical, but because it came from a place of hope rather than anger. Maya envisioned a team made up of officers, community leaders, and advocates working together to implement reforms. They would focus on mandatory bias training, greater accountability measures, and stronger relationships between police departments and marginalized communities. It was ambitious, yes, but also necessary. Word of Maya's proposal spread quickly, earning widespread support. Community members praised her for turning a painful experience into an opportunity for growth. Even some fellow officers, who had initially been wary of speaking out against one of their own, began to see the value in her approach. Change wouldn't come overnight, but Maya's plan offered a roadmap for progress. Meanwhile, Karen's world continued to unravel. Suspended pending investigation, she retreated into isolation, avoiding public appearances and declining interviews. Friends and family distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the scrutiny surrounding her name. Once confident and self-assured, Karen now found herself questioning everything, from her career choices to her deeply ingrained beliefs. Late at night, she replayed the events in her mind, haunted by the realization that she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Public pressure mounted as protests erupted outside the police department headquarters. Signs reading, "No more excuses," and "Justice starts with accountability," filled the streets, while speakers shared stories of their own encounters with bias and misconduct. Among them was Maya, who attended one rally not as a victim, but as a voice for change. Standing before a sea of faces, she spoke passionately about the need for unity and understanding. "This isn't about me," she said, her voice steady and clear. "It's about creating a system where no one has to fear being judged based on the color of their skin. We can do better, and we must." Her words resonated deeply, earning applause and cheers from the crowd. But perhaps the most surprising moment came when Maya announced her intention to invite Karen to participate in future discussions. "Accountability isn't about punishment," Maya explained. "It's about learning and growing. If we want real change, we have to include everyone, even those who've made mistakes." The announcement stunned both supporters and critics alike. Some argued that Karen didn't deserve a second chance, while others admired Maya's willingness to extend grace. Either way, one thing was undeniable: Maya's vision extended far beyond retribution. She was playing the long game, focusing on solutions that would benefit generations to come. As the rally concluded and the crowd dispersed, Maya stood quietly, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about fixing a broken system. It was about proving that even in the face of injustice, compassion and determination could pave the way forward. And though challenges lay ahead, Maya was ready to meet them head-on. Maya's decision to invite Karen to participate in the reform discussions sent shockwaves through the community. Some praised her for taking the high ground, while others criticized her for what they saw as misplaced generosity. Why give her a platform? One activist asked during a heated meeting. "She doesn't deserve it after what she did." Maya listened patiently, letting the voices around her express their frustrations before responding. "I understand why you feel that way," Maya began, her tone calm but firm. "What happened to me was wrong, and it hurt, both personally and professionally. But if we're serious about change, we can't just push people like Karen aside. We need to confront the biases head-on, not sweep them under the rug." Her explanation didn't win over everyone, but it planted a seed of understanding among many. The goal wasn't to excuse Karen's behavior. It was to use her story as a learning opportunity for her, for law enforcement, and for the community at large. Maya knew that real progress required uncomfortable conversations, even with those who seemed resistant to change. When Karen received the invitation, she was stunned. At first, she assumed it was some kind of trick, a setup meant to humiliate her further. But as she read Maya's letter again, she realized there was no malice behind the words. Instead, Maya emphasized the importance of accountability and growth, framing Karen's participation as a chance to make amends rather than face judgment. Karen wrestled with the decision for days. On one hand, she felt ashamed, humiliated by her actions, and terrified of facing public backlash. On the other hand, she couldn't ignore the small flicker of hope Maya's offer represented. Maybe this was her chance to rebuild, to prove she could be better than the person she'd been that night in the parking lot. Finally, after much deliberation, Karen accepted. The day of the forum arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. Community members packed into the auditorium, eager to hear what would unfold. Reporters lined the back rows, cameras ready to capture every word. When Maya took the stage, the room fell silent. She opened with a heartfelt speech about resilience, unity, and the power of second chances. Then, she introduced Karen. Karen walked onto the stage hesitantly, her hands trembling as she adjusted the microphone. For a moment, she stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sea of eyes staring back at her. But when she finally spoke, her voice carried a raw honesty that caught everyone off guard. "I owe all of you an apology," Karen began, her words slow and deliberate. "I let my biases cloud my judgment, and I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Agent Johnson could have sought revenge, but instead, she chose to show me grace. That's something I'll never forget." As Karen continued, she shared her struggles, the pressures of being a woman in law enforcement, the stereotypes she had internalized over the years, and the fear that admitting fault would mean losing everything. Her vulnerability resonated with some attendees, particularly those who had once doubted her sincerity. Others remained skeptical, their arms crossed tightly across their chests. But Maya's presence on stage helped bridge the gap. Throughout Karen's remarks, Maya nodded encouragingly, signaling solidarity without saying a word. When it was Maya's turn to speak again, she focused on the bigger picture. "This isn't about us," she said, gesturing between herself and Karen. "It's about creating a future where no one has to endure what I went through, or what Detective Hargrove is going through now. Change starts with courage. And today, we're taking a step in the right direction." By the end of the forum, the mood in the room had shifted. While not everyone agreed with Maya's approach, most left feeling hopeful that perhaps redemption was possible, even in the most unlikely places. And though Karen still had a long road ahead of her, she walked out of the auditorium with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be part of the solution instead of the problem. Backstage, Maya watched as Karen shook hands with a few attendees, her expression softer than it had been in years. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And sometimes, Maya thought, that was enough. In the weeks following the forum, Karen found herself in uncharted territory. The overwhelming support she had hoped for didn't materialize. Instead, her life became a patchwork of mixed reactions. Some people praised her for stepping forward and owning up to her mistakes, calling it a brave first step toward redemption. Others, however, remained unforgiving, labeling her apology as insincere or too little too late. Social media buzzed with debates about whether Karen deserved another chance, and the constant scrutiny weighed heavily on her. For the first time in years, Karen was forced to confront the consequences of her actions, not just professionally, but personally. Friends who had once stood by her side now avoided her calls, uncomfortable with the controversy surrounding her name. Even her family struggled to reconcile the person they knew with the headlines painting her as a symbol of systemic bias. Isolated and adrift, Karen spent long nights reflecting on how she had ended up here. But amid the chaos, Maya's words lingered in her mind like an echo. "Change starts with courage. Maya had said during the forum. Those simple yet powerful words became a kind of mantra for Karen, pushing her to take responsibility not just for that one night, but for the patterns of behavior she had ignored for so long. Slowly, tentatively, Karen began reaching out to organizations focused on police reform and racial justice. She attended workshops, listened to stories from individuals who had been mistreated by law enforcement, and volunteered her time to help develop training programs aimed at addressing implicit bias. At first, these efforts felt daunting. Many participants eyed her warily, unsure if her presence was genuine or performative. During one session, a young man openly challenged her, saying, "How do we know you're really sorry? Words are easy. Actions matter." Karen flinched at the accusation, but nodded in acknowledgement. "You're right," she admitted. "I can't undo what I've done. But I want to make sure no one else has to go through what Agent Johnson did because of me." Her honesty seemed to soften some hearts, though trust took time to build. Over the months, Karen committed herself fully to the work, showing up consistently and listening more than she spoke. It wasn't glamorous or rewarding. It was hard, humbling labor. But Karen began to see glimpses of progress. Colleagues who had initially dismissed her involvement started to notice her dedication, and community members cautiously acknowledged her efforts. While forgiveness remained elusive, respect slowly grew in its place. Meanwhile, Maya continued leading the task force she had proposed, turning her vision into reality. Under her guidance, the team implemented sweeping changes within the department: mandatory anti-bias training for all officers, increased transparency in disciplinary cases, and monthly town hall meetings where residents could voice concerns directly to law enforcement leaders. These initiatives weren't perfect, and resistance from certain factions persisted, but the impact was undeniable. Trust between the community and police began to mend, however gradually. Karen occasionally crossed paths with Maya during these events, and their interactions evolved from awkward to respectful. One evening, after a particularly productive town hall meeting, Karen approached Maya hesitantly. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice tinged with emotion, "for everything, for giving me this chance, for fighting for change, even when it would have been easier to walk away." Maya studied her for a moment before responding. "It's not about thanking me," she replied gently. "This is about doing the right thing, for yourself, for the community, and for anyone who comes after us. Keep going, Karen. That's how you'll truly earn your second chance." As Karen walked away, she felt a flicker of hope, a fragile but real sense that maybe redemption wasn't out of reach. The scars of that night in the parking lot might never fully fade, but they served as reminders of how far she'd come, and how much farther she still needed to go. Back at home, Karen sat down with a notebook, jotting down ideas for new ways to contribute. For the first time in months, she felt a quiet pride, not in who she had been, but in who she was striving to become. And though the journey ahead promised challenges, Karen knew one thing for certain: she was ready to face them head-on. Months turned into a year, and the city began to feel different. The changes spearheaded by Maya's task force weren't immediate or perfect, but they were tangible. Officers attended regular training sessions that went beyond surface-level discussions, diving deep into real-world scenarios and personal accountability. Residents noticed a shift in how law enforcement interacted with them. Less confrontational, more collaborative. Trust was still fragile, but it was growing, brick by brick. Karen, too, had transformed in ways she never thought possible. Once known for her abrasive demeanor and biased behavior, she now dedicated herself to mentoring younger officers on the importance of fairness and empathy. She joined community outreach programs, visiting schools and neighborhood centers to rebuild bridges she'd once burned. At first, people eyed her warily, their skepticism palpable. But over time, her consistency won them over, not completely, but enough to prove she was sincere. One crisp autumn morning, Maya stood outside the same diner where her life had intersected with Karen's. It felt surreal to be back here, this time without handcuffs or flashing lights. The parking lot was quieter now, the neon sign above casting its familiar glow. As she sipped her coffee at a corner table, Maya reflected on everything that had transpired since that fateful night. What started as an egregious misuse of power had sparked a movement, a ripple effect of change that extended far beyond either woman. Inside the diner, Karen sat nervously across from Maya, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea. They hadn't planned this meeting. It just happened naturally, two people drawn together by shared history and mutual growth. For a while, neither spoke, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, Karen broke it. "I never thought I'd say this," she admitted, her voice soft but steady. "But I'm grateful for what happened that night. Not because it was right. It wasn't. But because it woke me up. I don't know if I'll ever fully make up for what I did, but I can keep trying." Maya nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You've already come further than most would have expected," she said. "It takes courage to face your mistakes head-on, especially when the world is watching. You didn't have to do any of this, Karen. But you chose to, and that matters." Her words carried weight, not just for Karen, but for anyone willing to listen. Change wasn't about perfection. It was about effort, the relentless pursuit of something better, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Maya knew this firsthand. Her own journey hadn't been easy, balancing the demands of leadership with the emotional toll of reliving that night repeatedly. Yet, seeing the progress unfold made every challenge worth it. As the weeks passed, Karen took another bold step. She wrote an op-ed for the local newspaper, sharing her story openly. In it, she acknowledged her biases, apologized sincerely, and urged others in law enforcement to examine their own behaviors. The piece received mixed reactions, but many praised her honesty, calling it a powerful example of accountability. One reader commented, "If someone like Karen can change, maybe there's hope for all of us." The city itself became a beacon of progress, drawing attention from neighboring areas eager to learn from its example. Maya's task force expanded, partnering with state and national organizations to tackle systemic issues on a larger scale. Awards and accolades poured in, but Maya remained humble, always redirecting praise to the community that had made it all possible. On a chilly December evening, the city held a special ceremony to honor those who had contributed to the reform efforts. Maya and Karen stood side by side on stage, their presence symbolizing unity and resilience. As applause filled the auditorium, Maya leaned over and whispered to Karen, "This is just the beginning." Karen smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with unused tears. "Yeah," she replied, "and we're ready." The road ahead wouldn't be smooth. There would still be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But as the crowd cheered and fireworks lit up the night sky, one thing was clear: this city had taken a monumental step forward. Through grace, determination, and unwavering hope, Maya and Karen had shown that even the deepest wounds could heal, and that true change was always within reach.